Dilla create vibes now.
Welcome to another episode of the Get a Love Like Mine podcast. We are your humble hosts. I'm Keisha Amos. This is my beautiful husband, Sam Amos. And we are hoping that you're enjoying all the content we've been putting out so far. If you're not already, please go and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Get a Love Like Mine podcast. On Twitter, we're Get Love Like Mine. How's your week been this week, babe?
Not bad. Very hot.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the weather change here where we live, and football season just started, so kind of good, kind of bad.
He said not bad, and we had a whole hurricane this week.
It was a soft hurricane,
a soft category.
Knocked over a few trash cans. That's all.
All right, well, guys, we're going to talk about a kind of serious topic this week. We're going to talk about race and racism.
Yes. So to get started, let me pose the question to my host. How has racism affected you in your life, either as a kid or coming up as an adult?
As a kid, I really, and I'm gonna say this, it wasn't traumatic for me, but I remember it. So maybe it played a bigger role than I give it credit for. But I tell you, when I grew up Catholic, and I went to private school, first and second grade, kindergarten, first and second grade. But third grade, I went to public school after my mom and dad were divorced, and it was a kind of integrated type of school. It wasn't just all black. It was black, white, Hispanic, Asian. And there was a white girl who was a good friend of mine, or so I thought. We actually became better friends as like 4th and 5th grade. But 3rd grade, everybody was like, you know how when you're a kid, you're like, I want to be this when I grow up, or I'm Superman, or I'm Batman. And so I had said I was Cinderella or Snow White, one of the princesses. And she told me that I couldn't be whichever princess it was because I was black. She didn't call me a nigger, but she really, it really was like, dang. But I don't remember like experiencing so much stuff when I was a kid. But I know when we first bought our home, I had a cashier's check that I took to my bank. And it wasn't even a white person. It was a Hispanic person that really made me feel like a nigger because, and I'm saying that with the hard ER, because a cashier's check is like cash. And she told me she was going to put a hold on it because she didn't know where the check came from. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know where the check came from? I literally had the withdrawal receipt from the bank that it came from. I had the actual cashier's check. I had to like sit in there, speak to the manager, and do all this stuff just for them to honor the check. Now, this was my bank. It's not like I was taking it to some other bank where I didn't have an account. I had an account there. But she was like, we have to put a hold on it. So that was probably one of the most blatant times. Oh, I know. I just thought of another time, too. When I was 25, I take it back, 26. It was right after 9/11. I was actually arrested for evading arrest. And I don't know if I think I did mention that I went to the high school for law enforcement in high school, and we learned how to do fingerprints. We learned how to fingerprint, suspects, I guess you'd call them. And I worked at the police department, and I had to be fingerprinted to get the job, you know, for them to do my background check. So when I got arrested, the cop was doing my fingerprints, and I'm just rolling my fingers, you know, like I'm supposed to do. He said, "Oh, you look like an expert at this. You must have been arrested a bunch of times." And I'm like, "No, actually, I've done this before." But I feel like he said that because I was black. Like, the whole incident to me was because I was a black girl. But that's a topic for another podcast.
Wow.
So how about you? How did it affect you?
I don't really recall a whole lot of racism as a kid. It was probably there, but we didn't really know that's what it was. I mean, many years ago it was much more blatant than it is now. Now people at least try to disguise it.
They do dog whistles now.
Right, and they don't want to just come right out and say that's what it is, or they'll, you know, because, you know, it has become such a talked about topic. But I've worked for companies that were predominantly white, and then left there and went to another company that was basically all black, predominantly black, and the treatments, to my surprise at the time, were very, very similar. They were very similar. There was not one that was superior over the other one. They just did what they did for different reasons.
Right.
You know, like the place where it was mostly white folks, they treated me like I was black, and I was. You know, and I was in my early 20s. And then I went to work at the Postal Service where, you know, it's probably predominantly black, you would say. And it was just as bad. I mean, they didn't call you the N-word, but if there was someone that was either jealous of the way you looked or the car you drove that was in management, well, you could catch just as much downside as working at the other place. I thought I was going to something great leaving that place, and I watched a supervisor of mine get walked out of the building. He quit because of the way I was treated.
Really?
Yeah, he quit Budweiser. He was he was my supervisor, and trying to make a long story short, what happened, I was up for my own route, because I was a helper at the time, and they had protocols for you to get that route. You had to be there a certain amount of time and all this other stuff, and I had met all the requirements. Well, a new guy came in from another beer company, white guy. He hadn't even made his 90 days, and they just cut right in front of me and gave him the route. Well, my supervisor went off on him. He was angry. He said, you know, you're not supposed to do this guy like that. He's put his time in. He's met the requirements. He's supposed to be up for the next route. The man that was over my supervisor, most of those guys were white, he says, your problem is you love your people too much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember that statement, yes. You love your people too much. Not right is right, wrong is wrong, but we're still in charge here. So, you know, you need to lose some of that love you have for your people. So he quit. He walked out.
Wow, I don't blame him.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't know why every time you tell me a story about somebody doing you wrong, I get mad. Like, don't do my baby like that.
Well.
All right. Well,
that's why you need to get a love like mine. Get a love like mine. She gets offended. These stories are 20 years old. She's still where they at? I want to get to them.
So how do you deal with people like your supervisor, those who don't see anything wrong with doing our people wrong? You know, a lot has been going on since May 2020 when George Floyd got killed. It was like a moment of reckoning for the United States, and everyone kind of had to talk about race. Like there was no way around it. It was everywhere. Every company you saw, every commercial you saw, we've donated millions of dollars to the United Negro College Fund or wherever for racial inequity, and it was just so much. But you cannot deny that there are still people who see absolutely nothing wrong with the treatment of African Americans in this country. So just like, your supervisors, the manager who felt like, it was okay to skip the protocol to put one of his people up. How do you deal with people like that? How do you,
Well, personally, me, myself, we were always brought up, my mom raised us to believe that if you believe in God, if you believe in Christ, that whatever is for you is going to be for you. It's hard to live every day like that, especially when you're in the moment. It's hard for you to just let things go, and that was evident with my supervisor. But these things happen to us a lot, as from when we were younger, even to this day. And so you can't let those things get under your skin. You can only control what you can control. You've done the time, you've met the requirements, and still you get either looked over or some shady underhanded goes on where you don't get considered or you don't get what you thought you were entitled to. Well, sometimes those things are not meant for you. That may not be what God has for you. You may have something better for you. The route that I was slated to get at that time may have been more dangerous, and for me to be out there by myself. Who knows why I didn't get that one, but I ended up getting whatever one I got later on. So I don't always question that, because I worked there for a number of years after that, and it didn't really affect my performance. I still came to work and did what they paid me to do to the best of my ability, without holding grudges and stuff like that, because that's not biblical either.
Right.
So, really, to sum it all up, you just have to, if you pray and believe in God, you just have to believe that there may be something that you don't see why you did not get what you thought you were either going to get or was entitled to. Yeah, you were entitled to it. But
those no's that you get from God, when God say no, you better believe He protecting you from something, or He got something way better in store than what that little route was gonna get you. It's amazing that you say that. I thought about this while you were talking about your parents teaching you whatever is for you is for you, and it. I tell you, I've been reading my Bible. And, I always say I feel like everything happens for a reason. So Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, and then he gets sent into to jail. But because he's a dreamer, the Pharaoh brings him in, and then he's I can't remember if it was him or somebody else had the dream that the drought was coming, that a famine was coming on the land, and God had already promised them that they would, have life and have it more abundantly, that they would multiply and they would have the land of Canaan. And just the things that his brothers did put him in position to be the one to make sure they were fed, even though the rest of Egypt was going through a famine. So even later on, when they all ended up in slavery, God still looked out for each and every one of them. Like he knew they were suffering, but I always say this: He will let you suffer sometimes just so he can get the glory when he brings you out of it. Just so you know, the only way you made it out of that is because of me. You can't take the credit for it. This was me. You couldn't get it. You couldn't get out of it on your own. You had to rely on me. And man, it you know, that I guess you call it the cliche, was for you is for you. Man, that is real talk.
And you know, another thing that I've learned over the years when I look at scenarios that I'm in, and as I look back on this one, it's the exact same thing, is that even though I didn't get what I thought I was entitled to, I didn't lose anything.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't miss out on nothing. So I could go home and blood pressure up and angry and using unwholesome words. But at the end of the day, if you look at it, you didn't lose anything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're still healthy.
He's gonna sustain you. He's gonna maintain
you still have your job. You still, you know, drawing your paycheck. You didn't lose nothing because you didn't get that route. So I see that in my life a lot. Like, instead of just rushing in and reacting to what's on the surface, like, just hold on a second, because you may be wasting energy having a fit over something, and hey, what did you lose? Well, nothing really. All right, then you need to, you know, tone it down. So,
you know, in talking about people who don't see it the way we see it, I went to a class a couple of weeks ago dealing with trauma, how children are affected by trauma when they're abused. And I had this training, a part of it years ago when I worked for Children's Protective Services, that when they go through trauma early, their brains don't develop the way a child who didn't go through trauma, the way their brain develops. You can actually see scans of two children of the same age, one who was abused, one who wasn't, and there are literally parts of their brain that are not fully developed.
wow.
But part of the training a couple of weeks ago, the lady said there are, when women are pregnant with a female embryo, that us as women, we are born with all our eggs, whereas men, they produce sperm, you know, daily throughout their life. But we are born with our eggs, and then we pass them, you know, when we have cycles, and that's why we were talking about that biological clock. By the time you get to a certain age, you don't have any more eggs, so you're not going to get pregnant. But the fact that the eggs are in the embryos, that means that when I was pregnant, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren were inside of me. The eggs were. So the trauma that I experienced from possibly physical abuse or even like depression and anxiety, those things are passed down to my embryos and my children. You know, it's a generational thing. So while the lady was giving this talk, and the talk was about trauma, I'm thinking, well, that's the same with racism. That's the same with slavery. You know, people these days, a lot of times when we have the talk about slavery, they say, oh, well, I wasn't around back then. I didn't do that to your people. Right? Yeah, I didn't own slaves. I didn't do this. And then they don't understand how it's still affecting us generations later. But it's still affecting us because we were there. Basically, we were inside the mothers and grandmothers who were being raped and slaughtered and beaten during slavery. So it's still affecting us. We are filled with trauma. Hopefully, as time goes on, as we have more children, you know, that won't be the case. They won't be affected by slavery. But right now, like, slavery is not that far removed. It's really not. It's like, I think we're in 2021. I think maybe 2 generations ago, those people were, people who were actually slaves were still alive. Like my mom's dad, he wasn't a slave, but he was like right on the other side of it, to where he was still, at risk of being beaten by white people. He still made less money doing more work than they were doing. I mean, it still was, they were sharecroppers, so it was still the same. The only thing is nobody owned them. You know what I'm saying? They were doing the same work. It's just, slavery wasn't as long ago as people try to make it seem. But anyway.
Wow, that's, I had never heard or even thought of the generational curse in that fashion, that that your grandkids would feel the backlash from that because of the way your body is made. Like, wow, that's
Just imagine being in a relationship, being in an abusive relationship while you're pregnant. And then that baby comes, and the baby just crying all the doggone time. You don't know what's wrong with the baby. People be like, oh, he got colic or whatever. No, he just unhappy because of what he was born into. It's just in him. It's in his DNA.
Wow, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So, we were raised to try to treat people the way you want to be treated, which we use as the quote-unquote the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Well, I've come to find that as easy or as simple as that sounds, a lot of people or some folks don't feel the need to follow that, because it's like if I'm going to always be treated the same way, I'm always going to be put in front of the line, I'm always going to be given the benefit of the doubt in the courtroom, I'm always going to get the better loans with the lower interest rates and the calling, all these good things. If you are in line to receive those things regardless of how you act, why would you act a certain way? Like that golden rule stuff, that's for people that are hoping, I guess, and wishing that life can get better for them. But if I'm already living the good life, and regardless of how I act, and you see that a lot of times in these social media viral videos where people just, they're recording them, number one, but man, these folks act a fool and they don't care who got the camera on them.
They feel very entitled. They feel like I don't have to wear a mask if I don't want to. I'm not getting no dang on vaccine if I don't need to.
Who thinks like I'm not, that mask stuff, that's for others.
Just the fact that these people stormed our nation's Capitol building.
They felt entitled.
They felt like they could do that. And the police, I didn't realize until later on how they just ran over the police. I really thought the police just let them in. But what I do know, they didn't arrest them. Had that been a crowd of black people storming the Capitol, it would have been a murder scene on the Capitol.
Wouldn't have been no arrest.
It wouldn't have been no arrest. No. The way they were breaking windows and,
taking
oh my God. I just have never seen something so, it was the most hypocritical thing I've ever seen in my life. Y'all were mad because we were protesting about this man being murdered, and y'all just went up there and acted a fool in protest behind an election that was just what it was. It just, I don't feel like living by the golden rule, treating others the way you want to be treated. I don't feel like that's a hard thing to do.
It's not.
I am all about what's fair. We've told y'all before, we have 5 kids. If we gonna do it for one, we got to do it for all of them. We can't just pick and choose who we want to spoil this week. Everybody gets spoiled. Might be at different times. Might be for your birthday. Might be because you brought home a good report card or whatever. But everybody's going to get spoiled. Treating people the way you want to be treated is not something that's hard to do. But when you see yourself as up here, it's kind of like, yeah, I treat people the way I want to be treated, but I'm not going to treat the neighbor's dog the way I want to be treated. And they look at us almost like we're down here like the neighbor's dog, even though sometimes they treat animals better than they treat us.
Animal rights.
Like, it's a mess. It's a mess.
I thought about this while you were saying, you mentioned George Floyd earlier, and on this whole racism theme, it's like we've had protests and marches, the Million Man March, and we've marched on the Capitol many times as a race. We've had protests over Trayvon Martin, Rodney King, all these riots. People say, well, rioting, how is that going to help the problem? We're not trying to help the problem, so to speak. No, setting a building, setting a Wendy's on fire is not going to make any of this better. It's not. But understand, people only do that because that's all y'all understand. That's the only way to get y'all's attention. Other than that, you're going to go kill another George Floyd tomorrow and think nothing of it. But before I said all that, what I was getting to was the fact that we've had all these protests behind inequality and all these beatings and stuff from the police. And so when you look at other races, I couldn't think of one other time that another race had a march or a protest
For us?
or for their own self. When George Floyd was killed, there was multiple races marching with us, but they had never protested or marched before. Until they had to come to ours. They had to come march with us because this doesn't happen to them. It doesn't happen to their people. So, yeah, they saw this lady shoot this phone video of a man getting killed. And he's laying there crying for his mom, and it was a horrible, horrible way to die. Horrible for civilians to see it, to even play it back on TV. But for people to say, oh, this is the first time I've ever been moved enough to just march because this was just that bad. It took this happening for us to even feel the need to go out in the street and protest. Like, man, that is like really unequal. And I'm not saying, hey, somebody needs to go out and kill out a bunch of white folk or a bunch of Spanish folk. Or no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this thing is so lopsided. It's ridiculous. And it may not be slavery, but all this stuff gets channeled a different way. Like, folks looked at us crazy when we moved into the home we live in. Like, I don't know how many blacks were in this area, but seeing one more come in didn't have smile. Didn't bring the smile out of them.
I think it was a little more nosy than the welcoming committee. It was kind of like, who is this that finally moved into this house? We want to meet them. And then when they open the door and see, this handsome chocolate man here, they was looking quite surprised. How did they get in here?
How did they get in here? Now, no, they didn't say that, but that's how they made us feel. That's how the way they treated us. But like you said, that's another story for a whole nother podcast. We can talk on that for a very long time.
So based on that, we live in a neighborhood that's predominantly white. I won't even say predominantly white. It's just very minimal black people.
Yeah, because there's a mixture. There
are other races,
right? Especially at the elementary school, right?
My son's elementary school last year, kindergarten. He was the only black child in the class. Last year, I think there were 2.
But there's a lot of other.
Yeah, it wasn't just all white. But it's not very many black people. I guess it's kind of like they say the population is. You know, they label us a minority because we're about, I want to say, between 13 and 15% of the population. So I guess his school is kind of in line with that. But I brought that up because in kindergarten or first grade, whichever grade he was in, he told me he had a girlfriend. And his girlfriend was not black. And then this year, he tells me he has a crush, and I didn't want to say, is she black? I just said, well, how does she look? And he said, she's light skinned. I'm like, oh, she's black? I'm surprised. So I brought this up to ask, how do you feel about interracial relationships?
Are we talking in general, or are we talking about our kids?
Well, I want to start with you because I want to know personally, have you dated anybody outside your race?
No, I have not. Not that I'm like totally opposed to it, but
I hope you are totally opposed to it.
I haven't dated any, not even other black women since I've been married. But I don't see a problem with it. I just never did because I just always found beautiful black women. Yeah, so it wasn't it. It was I can't do it type deal. It just never happened.
Yeah, I also never dated anyone outside of my race, and it's not because I wasn't around them. I mean, like I said, when I got to 3rd grade, my elementary school was very diverse. My high school was diverse. I went to the University of Houston. That's the melting pot. That's what they call it. The melting pot is some of everybody there. But I also was really only attracted to black men. And what's crazy, I really was attracted to guys who kind of favored my dad. My dad was light skinned with light eyes, and that's kind of what I saw as appealing. I know I told y'all last podcast that me and my husband were in the same place at the same time lots of times. But I think I didn't pay attention to him because he was chocolate. and I was kind of color struck. I was kind of, I want somebody that looked like my daddy. That's crazy. But as far as the kids, I kind of expected. Because they are a lot more, it's a lot more diversity in their schools than it was when I was growing up. Even though my schools were diverse, it was a lot of black people still. Like my son, it's not that many black people at his school, so I kind of expected him to
take a liking
to just a pretty woman. I mean, a pretty girl. It didn't matter what race. Then our older boys, the oldest one, I don't think, well, I did see him with one black girl, but I've seen him with a white girl. I've seen him with a Hispanic girl. I don't think they see a difference with it, and I don't think I would have an issue either way. My dad was from Louisiana, so he experienced racism on a different level. My grandmother, my dad's mom, had a 2nd grade education. That just goes to show how that generation was. Like, they weren't slaves, but they were not far from slavery. So they weren't, I mean, if she was still alive to know that her granddaughter is, where she is now, I think she would be amazed because of the fact that she had that 2nd grade education. She couldn't read. But my dad had, like, you know how you hear like Charlemagne the God or even Dave Chappelle where they call white people cracker. That's what my dad used to call them. Crackers, them crackers. And he used to warn me, like, you know, they're going to try to do this, they're going to try to do that. So I personally would have never felt comfortable coming home saying, Daddy, look who I got. It's Chad. And my daddy I don't think he would have went for that. But I personally, I don't have an issue with it for my kids.
And see, that was a different time era, you know. And we were able to see things that either the grown-ups when we were kids did or our parents did. And either you learn from it, you take something from it, or you're going to say, okay, that's something I'm not going to do around my kids. And I don't want to point out, what your race is in a way that my kids will think something's wrong with it. You know, I look at, like you said, a lot of these classes and like even at the mall and stuff like that, it's a pretty big mixture now, you know, as opposed to when we came up. But, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I've never lived that life dating wise to see or know what type of hard times come with it. You know, like I think back, like off the top of my head, that terrorist movie, whatever it was called, it was with Samuel Jackson, and the family moved in next to him. It was a black girl and a white guy. And he just gave them the blues. He just couldn't deal with it because he had something bottled up in him from the past. So I could imagine that there are probably, you know, people look at you, people that, you know, maybe aren't very intelligent or very one-track minded, see you holding hands with another race and, you know, talk down on it with kids listening. And then before you know it, you've raised that kid to think this is wrong. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, other than the fact that you have a hang up with it.
I think our generation as kids, we were at the pinnacle of it's not cool to have interracial dating. Like when I was coming up, it was like if you saw a black basketball player or football player with a white woman, it was like, oh, he is just betraying the black race and all this. I guess I never really saw it like that because I guess you call it the one drop rule, because when the kids come out, they black. I don't care if you are interracial. When you look at them, first thing you think is they black. If they're not full black, they got some black in them somewhere. So it wasn't cool to do it back then, but like I said, I don't think, as I mentioned earlier about the embryos and the generational trauma, I think as the generations grow, it's not going to be as big a deal when people do interracial dating or interracial marriages or, you know, having all these little mixed babies.
So, to kind of sum up all that we've touched on today, racism going forward, what do you see? Do you see, is there ever going to be a time where racism doesn't exist? Is it going away? Is it getting stronger? Is it just taking a circle and making a square out of it and stick it back on shit? Is it always going to be around?
I don't think it's always going to be around. And that's only because, like I said, generations are going to die. There are people right now still alive. They're old, but they're still alive, who are probably the grandchildren of people who owned slaves. So when all of those people die off, and it's like the kids that are here now, and when they have kids and a generation after that, I don't think they're going to be dealing with as much personal racism. And I say that to say because there is still systemic racism. It's like embedded in
society,
in our infrastructure, in our prisons, in our schools, in our hospitals. It is systemic in our economy. So I think it's going to take work with that. And if, like I said, if the next couple of generations, if they come along and they enter the workforce, I think they could probably change some things. I don't think it's something we'll ever see. Mm-hmm. I think we'll be long gone before there's no racism.
Wow.
But I think it has gotten so much better because, like you said, we moved into the neighborhood we moved into is just a few of us sprinkled in, but we're here. And, you know, they have to respect that. It's not like they have burned a cross in our front yard. So, I mean, it's better than it was, but, you know, it's still a long way to go. But I really think that next couple of generations, maybe our grandkids or great-grandkids, they'll be the generation to change it. Because this generation now, like, they are with the I ain't gonna say the word, but they with it. They, like, are ready to see some change. They're not just going with the status quo. I've seen, I think the little girl, Kellyanne Conway, who worked for Trump, her daughter was like calling her out every chance she got. Like, my mom is doing this. You know, she was like, she wasn't with it. So I think the next couple of generations, they are gonna, you know, do what's needed to make the change because, you know, it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah. This doesn't seem that difficult. The smallest word, equality, it just doesn't seem like it should be that hard. But I guess on the equality line, if your position is always up here,
mm-hmm.
What do you care about those people? You know, I'm enjoying up here, and you're asking me to give some of this up?
And then you have kids who, you know, they grow up together. Like our 7-year-old, his best friend is a little white guy. But if his best friend is starting out here and our son is starting out here, they're both in 2nd grade. They could be on the same path. But what's going to take our son to bring him up to where, you know, his best friend is? What is it going to take? And you know what it's going to take? It's going to take God saying what's for you is for you.
I believe it. That's how we got to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have anything else? Because I have one thing I want to share before we go, but I want to make sure you don't have anything.
It was one more thing, but I'll save it for another time. Oh, I was going to ask, do you think black people can be racist?
Oh, absolutely.
You do?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Against other black people or against other races?
Well, I think the word racist, I think it only pertains to doing it to an opposite race. Now, if you do it to your own race, that's just
I don't like them.
Jealousy or I'm hating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't call it racist, but the same concept. Oh, absolutely. I've dealt with a lot of that.
I guess I know we can be prejudiced towards other races, like, but I don't see us as racist because for some reason I equate racism with power.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's almost like you have power over this other race. And we as black people don't have power over any other race. But I do believe can be prejudiced against other races. You know, it's a lot of stereotypes that we as black people feed into concerning other races, white people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Middle Eastern people. Ever since 9/11, you let a Middle Eastern person walk in the room, put a backpack on the floor, everybody is going to get ghosts. And it might not mean anything, but it's just these stereotypes that we feed into. So I do think we could be prejudiced against other races, but not necessarily racist.
Against your own race.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what was your one thing?
I want our listeners and our viewers to see this because it touched my heart. And this guy doesn't know I'm gonna say this, but I'm gonna share it anyway. And if he doesn't listen or watch our podcast, then he won't even know I said it. Okay, so let me try to make a long story short. My mother-in-law, her mom, her vehicle was in a car accident. Not with her driving. She let somebody else use her car. The car ended up wrecked. Well, she didn't have a car. So, one of our sponsors here, the guy, he owns
Top Choice Lending,
and he owns one more.
Gilliard Homes.
Gilliard Homes, right.
Mm-hmm.
Real estate guy. Real good guy. Good heart. So, he saw the problem. He was not part of the problem, but he decided to make himself part of the solution. Mm-hmm. So he jumped in to help, and he bought my mother-in-law a new car, or another car, for her birthday, surprised on her birthday. So a lot of times you see people in life that if they're willing, oh man, I would do it if I could, but they're not able. Mm-hmm. And what's worse is the flip side of that is there's a lot of people that's able that would look at that same situation, but man, I didn't tell Cole, I ain't got nothing. Mm-hmm. They're not willing. Mm-hmm. But when willing meets able, then you get a blessing. I just wanted to point this guy out because we were allowed to see willing meet able. You don't see it every day. Mm-hmm. But like I say, he was not part of the problem, but he decided, I'm going to make myself part of the solution. So, great job, Ken.
Yes, great job. So, this week we don't have a Ask the Amoses question, but if you guys would like your question answered, it does not have to be about relationships, but if it is, or parenting, or your walk with God,
we got the answer.
Whatever it is, we're here and willing to give you some feedback. You can send your emails to getalovelikeminepodcast@gmail.com and put in the subject line Ask the Amoses. And that is it for today. Thank you guys. See you next week.
Have a good day.